Adam, I was just talking about, I believe you spoke with Ryan Day recently about, and by the way, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. But about how he believes the Big Ten deserves 4 automatic qualifiers, and how I feel like that's a little bit of a different message than we got at the end of the SEC spring meetings, which it felt like it morphed into actually we prefer more of the 5-11.
Right. Well, I think, again, the Big Ten, which didn't really do any public speaking at its own meetings, has had this 4-4-2-2-1 idea percolating for quite some time. And so I think what Ryan did when I interviewed him yesterday is just vocalize that. That's been generally the Big Ten's position. And maybe it was a little bit more of the SEC's position going into the meetings last week. And then they obviously, as you mentioned, got more rallied around that 5-11 model, which is certainly what the ACC and the Big 12 favor. I think Ryan's point is not all leagues are created equal. Not all schedules are equal, and as a Big Ten conference with 18 members and the last 2 national championships, they feel like they're entitled to more than one guaranteed spot essentially for their champion. So how it ultimately plays out will be very interesting. But I think Ryan's position is one that I think resonates throughout the Big Ten right now. And does that lead to some type of standoff with the other conferences or a slowdown to the process? All these things are on the table.
How would a BCS model work in a 12, 16-team playoff world, 14-team playoff world where, in the beginning, we're talking about a couple of teams getting into it, right? But if there was some kind, and I think AI has come such a long way, and if that was part of the component, how would it work in today's world?
You're talking about something that's more of an analytics based?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, obviously, the SEC put out those lists at the end of its media week there in Destin. I think it would be very difficult to get widespread support for that type of thing. There would be claims, whether justified or not, of this system or that system being biased towards one league. David, what I think we have to get to, and I know not everyone in the SEC likes this, is uniform scheduling in college football. You have to play 9 conference games. You have to schedule a 10th Power 5, a Power 4 opponent. And if you have that on the table, I think there would be greater willingness from the Big Ten side to go to a 5-11 model or something like that. And by the way, it's not a guarantee that we go to 16 teams right away. I mean, that was a message that I got. I didn't report that until now, as from talking to some other people yesterday, that the play here from the Big Ten side might be to slow things down. And hey, we got 12 teams. We got a model for 2025. We could run that back for 2026. We could certainly go to 16 teams, but we're now in no rush to get to the finish line right now because of these issues that we're working through. But I think one thing that does bother people in the Big Ten, and Ryan vocalized that in his comments to me, is that the schedule models aren't all equal. And the SEC can say, well, our data shows that the 8 conference games is stronger than your 9 conference games. It's just a hard argument to buy, especially with the Big Ten having the last 2 national champions, having the number 1 overall seed in the playoff last year. It's a lot easier just to say, hey, we're all playing the same number of conference games. We're all feeding into the same playoff system. And then may the best 12 teams ultimately get there, the best 16 teams.
Couldn't you look? I've been talking about this on the show, and I know the likelihood of it happening is not high at all. It's just a fact that's probably impossible. But if we're talking about this uniform scheduling, couldn't you see a world where you get your 9 conference games, but you also need to play one game against a Big Ten team, one game against a Big 12 team or an ACC team, but making sure those other conferences are scheduled in there as well, so it isn't the cupcake games that we always talk about, and maybe. I'm adding to this as I'm thinking, and it's probably just a ridiculous thought, but maybe some of these easier cupcake games, you save that for a game or 2 in the spring.
I love that idea. Yeah, I love any idea that gives college football fans a more robust schedule. And I'm against anything that would decrease the likelihood of games like Ohio State and Texas to open the season, or Clemson and LSU, or Alabama and Florida State. I mean, these are the brands that we all grew up watching and being connected to with the sport, why not have them play more often? So I would love to see a directive like that. And you're right. If you have to move an FCS game to the spring to generate some revenue for those programs, that's great. I don't think those games serve the fans. I think that's a wasted Saturday. And this isn't a long season. We're not talking about baseball. Pro baseball, college basketball, they all have much longer seasons. So why are we wasting weekends? Why are we catering so much of the schedule towards the teams that are just trying to get bowl eligible? I just don't think that's the way you build the sport. You build the sport from the top down and really do what's best to serve the fans of the best teams. That's what I'm about. And what Ryan pointed out to me yesterday is, hey, if we don't have automatic qualifying spots and we don't have equal schedules across the board, a game like Texas Ohio State would be less likely to happen. So that would be my fear.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel, and tell me if I'm on point here, because you said they don't have to move to 14 or 16. The longer this takes, the more the likelihood is in 26, it's going to be 12.
Yeah. Right, which again, and that's okay too. My whole thing with an expanded playoff was, would we ever have a situation where a team that was capable of winning a national championship wasn't part of the field? And honestly, for most of the 14 playoff, I don't think either of us can sit there and say there was a team that was left out that could have won the whole thing. But there were some examples. I mean, TCU in 2014 is one that immediately comes to mind. I've always felt they could have won a national championship that year. Ohio State in 2015, talented enough with all of those high draft picks to at least make a run. With a 12-team playoff, unless the selection committee really screws up, the teams that are capable of winning a national championship are in the field every year. And most of those teams, let's face it, are from the SEC and from the Big Ten. And you could say, oh, Ole Miss, man, we were talented enough last year. Well, if you were, you wouldn't have lost to LSU, and you wouldn't have lost to Florida. So you weren't capable enough in my mind. You played your way out. That's okay. That happens. But I think with 12 plus, we are always going to have the right teams that can win a national championship be part of this thing.
I would say the only counter to that, it's not really a counter, just a thought. I think there are teams that are sometimes just as deserving, and I'll go to 2020 because I think A&M was just as deserving as Notre Dame to get into that one. But we can move on from that. I want to ask you about Coach Elko and what you've seen from him in a year that I think people feel like A&M's on the right path outside of what happened in November. And I think if you take a macro view of it, November, as much as it sucked living it and seeing it happen here in College Station, it kind of made sense with a first-year program and also the injuries that this team had.
Right. And certainly the injury component is part of it. And obviously your opponents, playing a team like Texas at the end, very talented team. It's the concern that I have is it did feel a little familiar at the end, and you want to break from that. You want to break from that in performance. You want to break from that in how you construct your roster, the areas of the roster that are good. And again, I look at this A&M team, and starting with that offensive line, that could be one of the best in college football. And then, that backfield that, could be one of the better ones in the SEC if everybody stays healthy, with the two running backs coming back from injury. Obviously, Marcel's still there, second year in the system. I'm a believer in Colin Klein. I saw what his offenses can do at Kansas State. And so I think this is a year that they can take a step forward. But there's going to be, at least nationally, I think some justified doubt until they go out and deliver and put together a complete season and don't have that same old A&M feel that we had at the end of the year when you're losing to Texas and you're losing to South Carolina and you're losing to obviously a very average USC team in a bowl game. And we could certainly debate whether that's a good barometer or not. But I do think things are moving more quietly, maybe in the right direction. Mike is not a guy that's looking for the most accolades on signing day or the most hype. That just isn't who he is. He's going to just quietly grind away and build a roster that I think will, in the long run, serve A&M better. I don't know if it'll happen this year or next year, but I do think this year they have a chance to take a step forward.
Let's talk about your list of playmakers for 2025 that include, for non-quarterbacks, that includes an Aggie, Le'Veon Moss. It's no coincidence that when he went down, the season went south. You've got to build a program that can withstand that kind of injury. But He'll be back this year. He should be a top playmaker. You team him up with Reuben Owens, Amari Daniels, E.J. Smith, the whole backfield coming back with that offensive line. Just talk to me a little bit about Le'Veon and how he made that list for you.
No doubt. Yeah. And just in making calls, he was a guy that jumped out that obviously did some great things before the injury. And then from my sources, I'm sure you've talked to similar people, like he's responded really well. It's a big injury, obviously, for a running back, any position, but especially someone who uses your legs as much as a running back does. So his response, his recovery has been encouraging for people there in College Station. And the fact, like you said, he doesn't have to carry the ball 37 times a game. He doesn't have to do what Ashton Jeanty did last year for Boise State to be at his best and most effective. And Colin Klein's a guy that likes to have multiple ball carriers in his offense so that you're not overly reliant on just one running back and don't stress the quarterback too much from a running standpoint. So I think he's someone, again, behind that offensive line that could really make some noise. A&M's got to obviously replace some outstanding defensive linemen. That's where I maybe have more questions, but I think this offense is poised to be definitely a top half of the SEC offense and maybe one of the better offenses in the conference if, again, they can stay healthy, because that was obviously a big factor last year.
Adam, do you see things as maybe 4 tiers in the SEC? You got your top 2 or 3 teams, and we can debate who those are, but I think they're kind of obvious. Then you got that next group, potentially Alabama being there. I don't know who else would be in that mix where they could potentially be in that top 2, but and then there's a jumbled group of teams that could certainly move into that second spot or stay right there in the middle spot, and then you got your 2, 3 terrible teams.
Yeah, and I think there's who's in those second 2 groups is so interesting. I think going into this year, probably just from an overall talent standpoint, I would put Georgia and Texas at the top. Did LSU do enough in the offseason with a returning quarterback, a 4,000-yard passer, to belong in that top group? They weren't last year. I mean, again, I tell a lot of people this story. I was on the field before the Ole Miss game and at LSU, and you're used to going to LSU and used to seeing them look more talented than the other team. That wasn't the case. Ole Miss was much more talented than LSU. Now, to LSU's credit, they found a way to come back and win that game in overtime. But LSU obviously has to be the more talented team this year if they want to get to the college football playoff. Can never count out Alabama. I'm a Kalen DeBoer guy. I've watched his career for many years. I think he's going to have that team in position to make the playoff. But then, there's a lot of teams. South Carolina. Where does Tennessee fall? Where does Texas A&M fall? Florida has a lot of talent and excitement, but also some question marks, including the health of their quarterback DJ Lagway. So I think that second, who's truly in the second group? Because if you're in the second group, you're in the playoff hunt. And then if you're in the third group, you're probably not, but you're not that far away. And then obviously, there's some teams at the bottom, and Mississippi State's certainly a ways away, but I think could certainly improve if they get some better luck on the health front. And some other teams are you always have to have a bottom. It's just how it works in college football. But who's in group tier 2, tier 3 is going to be fascinating this year in the SEC.
Well, and then if you look at the top 2 teams you mentioned, I think schedule-wise, Texas opening up with Ohio State, obviously a very difficult game, but it'll be 2 quarterbacks making, one his first start, one a very early start in his career. But outside of that, I feel like their schedule is very manageable. Georgia, on the other hand, not such a manageable schedule.
No, it's interesting. I mean, the team that won the national championship in 21 and 22 has certainly borne the brunt of some of the scheduling here the last couple of years. But and they have questions. I mean, again, the thing that's exciting if you're an SEC fan or you're an A&M fan in particular, you just don't have these behemoths anymore. I think Georgia's vulnerable. Texas, defensively maybe not, but offensively, we don't know how good Arch is going to be. And then Georgia, Gunnar Stockton thrown into a difficult situation. They didn't go out and add a transfer. They're going to run with him at least to begin the season. Are they going to have better receiver play with players they have coming back and bringing in a guy like Zachariah Branch? Or are we going to see the same problems that I think plagued them offensively at times last season? And if so, with the schedule that they have, it could be tough for Georgia to defend its SEC title and obviously be in that playoff mix. So, and then again, Alabama's not Nick Saban's Alabama. So there are pathways for programs like LSU, for like South Carolina this year, A&M. There are pathways to move up in the SEC. Well, you just know that not everyone can do it, and we'll see who does.
Adam, great stuff, man. Thanks so much for making time.
Thanks for having me.
Later, buddy.